You've tried texting, explaining, waiting for them to come back, but instead, they only pull away more. You may think closeness and effort will break through, but in reality, that's exactly what pushes them further. I'm Jim Rohn, and today I'm revealing the counterintuitive move that isn't about manipulation or playing game. It's about returning to yourself and, strangely, it's what triggers an avoidant to do a 180 degrees and suddenly become obsessed. You don't need to chase, you don't need to explain, you don't even need to act cold. What you need is to become emotionally unreactive, steadfast, calm, unaffected by their distance or silence. When you ground yourself in stillness, you create a magnetic energy they can't resist. Avoidants build control when they know you'll respond. But when suddenly you don't know disappointment, no pleading, no chase, they start to feel something missing. They start asking, why can't I get to them? And when that shift finally happens, you'll see a powerful change you never expected. Watch the whole video. I'll show you not only how to get them to take notice, but how to stay centered and not lose yourself in their emotional games. Hit subscribe if you're ready to hold your self-respect, instead of bending backwards for someone who's experts at keeping their distance. Trying to chase, explain, or seek validation only triggers avoidance defenses. You might have believed that if you just gave more, texted more often, explained your feelings in detail, maybe even wrote long, heartfelt messages, they would soften, understand, and come closer. But the truth isn't that cruel, it's just different. The first instinct of an avoidant when faced with emotional effort is not to move toward you, it's to pull back. Each text asking for connection, each call hoping for clarity, each emotional explanation feels like a signal to their nervous system. Connection equals pressure equals loss of freedom. And in the avoidance inner world, freedom is everything, even if it means loneliness. Instead of opening up, they shut down further. Not because they don't feel many but because they've trained themselves to run at the first sign of losing emotional control. Their mindset whispers, better to distance than to risk being misunderstood, overwhelmed, or expected to give more than they can. What they need is space, not persuasion. Any effort you make to convince them otherwise only reinforces the idea that you're still emotionally dependent on their response, something that heightens their fear of entanglement. The real shift doesn't happen in what you say. It happens in what you do with yourself. The turning point comes not when you beg, explain, or overextend, but when you stop reacting altogether. When you lower the volume of emotional reactivity, you create something rare, a field of internal safety, for yourself first, and that throws the avoidant off. Because they're used to people chasing, explaining, needing reassurance. Suddenly, that energy is gone. You're still. You don't move. You don't chase. You simply exist in your own peace. This isn't coldness, it's emotional stability. You don't panic when they pull away. You don't get angry when they go silent. You don't wish them guilt or hope they'll feel you're hurt. You simply sit with yourself, grounded and self-honoring. Even when they don't change, you remain unchanged. Even when they reject closeness, you remain steady in your worth. This doesn't just shift your energy, it shifts the entire field of the dynamic. When you stay centered, unshaken by their silence or inconsistency, you send a subtle but powerful message. I am worthy of committed connection, not confusion. I will not chase crumbs pretending to be care. You're not asking for commitment. You're embodying calm boundaries. And that starts to unsettle the avoidant, because for the first time, they don't know where you stand. They can't predict your next move. They can't rely on your need for reassurance. You're not orbiting around them anymore. And the greatest shift happens here. You're no longer emotionally entangled. You don't check your phone every minute. You're not waiting for a reply. You're not analyzing vague texts. You've become the one with the emotional anchor, rooted, still, and unavailable to chaos. When an avoidant senses that your emotional energy is no longer attached to their behavior, something begins to stir. The distance they once created no longer holds the same power. Your silence isn't reactive, it's reflective. Your boundaries don't punish, they protect. And for the first time, they're left wondering, why aren't they reaching out? Did I lose them for real? What if they finally moved on? These questions create a spark, not because you chased, but because you didn't. When you stop reacting, when you hold your emotional balance and refuse to get swept up in their inconsistency, something strange happens. They begin to confront themselves. There's no one left to blame, no one reacting for them to control. Your emotional silence becomes a mirror, forcing them to face the very defense mechanisms they've used to avoid closeness. And that's when the power dynamic starts to shift. Avoidants are used to running the emotional rhythm of the relationship. They create space, you chase. They go silent, you initiate. But when you no longer dance to that emotional beat, when you become calm, steady, no longer needing to be led, they begin to feel something unfamiliar. They've lost control over you. And that realization makes them uncomfortable, even anxious. Because in that stillness, there is no coldness. There's a very clear message. I'm no longer chasing. I'm peaceful enough to let go of someone who's not ready to stay. And that message delivered without a word is what shakes them. The quieter you are, the more they feel drawn to you. Not because you're playing games, but because you're becoming a person of emotional gravity. Someone who no longer needs someone else's emotional responses to feel whole. That is rare and difficult for avoidants to process. Your stillness makes them question, why doesn't this affect them like before? Have they really moved on? From doubt comes curiosity. From curiosity comes attraction. You don't have to be cold. You don't have to perform strength. True calm untainted by manipulation or emotional performance is what makes them feel something they rarely feel. Emotional safety. And here's the paradox. Avoidance is a defense mechanism built to escape intimacy, but the emotional safety in your silence awakens a buried desire for connection. Your emotional self-containment, your refusal to chase, panic, or collapse forces them to see themselves for the first time. They can't blame you anymore. You're not too much. You're not demanding. You're simply not reacting. And that makes them confront a deeper truth. The discomfort isn't about Utes, it's about their own unresolved insecurity. This isn't comfortable for them, but it is the beginning of their awakening. You stop giving them emotional certainty. Instead, you become a steady presence with boundaries, peace, and self-respect. When you stop offering them emotional predictability, always being available, responding instantly, explaining yourself, you initiate a profound shift. You become unpredictable, and that unpredictability creates an emotional tension that avoidance cannot ignore. But let's be clear, this isn't about emotional games or coldness. It's about honoring your self-worth and setting clear boundaries. Those boundaries don't isolate you, they dismantle the initiative they use to control you. You stand firm. No late-night texts, no chasing, no justifications. You choose silence, but with intention and integrity. And here, the pull begins. They sense your presence not as a silent retreat, but as emotional stability. They're used to steering connections through their absence-making. You initiate, chase, or fill the emptiness. But when you refuse to do that, you open up something entirely different, a steady, self-contained presence that doesn't bend, argue, or diminish. It's a presence that doesn't demand their attention, yet doesn't vanish into non-existence, one that's anchored in self-respect. In that space, avoidants feel something they rarely do, a subtle void that isn't threatening, just different. Not the desperation of someone needing them, but the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't depend on them. It's the first time they question, why can't I reach them the way I used to? Have I lost their attention? It's this internal curiosity that sparks attraction, not because you forced it, but because you chose to stop chasing and let them wonder. They begin to observe small shifts, your delayed responses, your focused commitments, your calm energy. You aren't reactive to their silence or inconsistent behavior. You remain present, dignified, and at peace. They start to think, do they still matter to me? Not because they fear abandonment, but because they realize you may not need them. And that unsettles them more than any chase ever could. Here's the unexpected truth. They didn't fall for your attention, they fell for your grounded presence. You didn't call, text, or explain, you just were. Emotionally unwavering. That gives them a choice, to come forward from curiosity or drift without urgency. They realize they don't know what's going on inside you anymore, and that unknown draws them closer. As you solidify your emotional center, uphold your boundaries, and refuse to survive on their validation, you aren't trapping them, you're transforming the relationship dynamic. When your emotional standard changes, they have to consider you differently, not as someone to be managed, but as someone real, stable, and unmovable. That kind of presence is unforgettable. Avoidants rarely see it. They expect you to react, to chase, defend, justify. But when none of that happens, their defenses falter. Without emotional reassurance, without validation, they're forced to sit with their own reactions. They begin to question their patterns. Am I pushing them away? They start to wonder what about you they loved was real. Was it the chase, or was it you? All it took was your stillness, your consistency, and your self-respect. In your quiet, they reflect. In your peace, they feel drawn. The way you show up without seeking them, really show up, becomes the magnetic force. No drama, no games, just the solid knowing of your own worth. You're not withholding as a tactic. You're choosing yourself. And that choice, you being unshakable in your self-respect, is exactly what pulls them toward you. Suddenly, it's not about their control, it's about their curiosity, and eventually, their genuine interest. So yes, you don't chase, you don't crave clarity, you don't force answers. You simply stand fully in yourself. And what happens next is astonishing. The avoidant to routine, predictability, emotional submission begins to lean in. Not because they wanted to fill a void, but because they see something irresistible in a heart that doesn't need them to feel complete. That, my friends, is the heart of unexpected magnetism. When you offer calm presence instead of emotional pursuit, you turn the tables not with manipulation, but with authenticity. And that shift doesn't just attract them, it disarms them. When they realize they can no longer control your emotions, it's not just different, it's unforgettable. There was a time when you tried everything to make them stay. You explained, you pleaded, you kept texting, hoping your words would create closeness. But instead of pulling them toward you, each action only made them retreat deeper into their shell. That's the paradox. The more you chased, the faster they disappeared. But then you did something powerful. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining. You stopped hoping. You held onto your inner peace. And in that stillness, you created something that changed everything. You became untouchable. Suddenly, the distance between you was no longer a place you used to beg for answers. It became the very silence they had to confront. When they sensed you were doing just fine without them, the question hit hard. Why aren't they panicking in my absence? And the answer wasn't strategy, it was truth. You are worthy, grounded, and no longer playing a game you never consented to. When they see that their signal smiles, silences, vague messages no longer pull emotional reactions from you, their world shifts. You've become calm, solid, and no longer moved by them. And that calm disarms them, because for the first time, they've lost the emotional control they're used to having. That loss of control plants a seed. First it's confusion, then curiosity, and slowly, obsession. Because while they're used to holding power through distance and unpredictability, your refusal to participate in that dance breaks their rhythm. They don't know what to make of your peace. And so, they remember your presensino as someone to control or test, but simply as someone who was there. When they realize your life force, your energy, your joy no longer depends on them, something shifts. They start to feel small inside your absence. And that makes them want to know you again, not to pull you back in, but to understand how you can be so okay without them. When they finally reach out, maybe with a casual, "How have you been?" it's not a gesture of power, it's fear. Fear that you're truly gone, because you're no longer predictable. You're no longer performing emotional availability. You're simply steady. And for an avoidant, that kind of steady isn't just interesting, it's unforgettable. Because it isn't a performance. It's not manipulation. It's the kind of inner wholeness they've never known. And that becomes a mark in their mind, something they can't shake. Once they realize they can't pull you back with silence or breadcrumbs, you become something entirely different in their emotional world. Someone they couldn't control. Someone they now can't forget. This isn't about revenge. You didn't become distant to punish them. You simply became still, secure, and strong. You didn't react, you responded with your absence. You didn't beg, you chose yourself. They start to feel your strength in a way they never did when you were emotionally available. And that difference, that silence, that grounded self-worth, it echoes louder than any words ever could. And maybe, just maybe, they begin to change. Not because you chased, but because you didn't. In the end, what makes an avoidant obsessed is not the chasing, the long explanations, or the emotional meltdowns you once used to keep them close. What becomes unforgettable is when you no longer need them. When you live with unwavering self-respect. When you stop trying to prove your worth and simply show up in your grounded presence. They feel something they've spent their entire lives avoiding. Emotional safety that doesn't demand. And that cannot be faked. You don't have to manipulate to pull them in. You don't need strategies to make them change. All you have to do is stand in your own light, calm, steady, whole. That's what pulls them in, what leaves a mark, what sometimes for the first time makes them confront themselves. And even if they never come back, so what? Because you're no longer waiting. You're no longer holding out hope for temporary change. You've changed from the inside out. And that is your real win. Not because they lost you, but because you chose yourself. If this message resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you never miss another video. I'm Jim Rohn, and I'm here to remind you, real love never makes you question your worth.